Hi, everyone. My name is Lala, and I'm the deputy editor at the Journal of Cardiac Failure, or JCF.
And hi, my name is Martha Gulati, and I'm the patient empowerment editor for JCF.
And my name is Kristin Flanary, and I am the co-patient and patient partner editor for JCF.
Well, I'm just so excited to be here with both of you. I think this is a really exciting opportunity for us at JCF. Lady Glaucomflecken, or Lady G, as you've become sort of a social media icon, really, who have used this platform for advocacy, Kristin, which is such an incredible thing that you have done. And Martha and I, and on behalf of our entire community, really want to thank you for the tremendous work you've done to bring awareness to sudden cardiac death, to CPR education, and raising awareness around this space and the experiences, not only for the patients, but also for their co-patients, their patient partners, and for their families. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, I would say my pleasure. That's a weird way to say it, given the circumstances around all of that. But I'm happy to do it. It helps to feel like you're helping others sometimes when you've had your own difficult experiences. So puts it to good use.
So, Kristin, I just wanted to talk about this beautiful piece that you've written for JCF. You wrote this companion piece, basically, Words to Leave By, Bridges Out of the Quiet Places. It was so moving to everyone who's read it, whether you're somebody in the healthcare community. I've had patients bring it to me.
Wow.
It really... everything that we think is important in medicine seemed to be encompassed in what you wrote, but you somehow have this gift for putting it in a way that none of us had thought of before. And I think whether we call you the co-patient or, you're teaching us so much about the experience that our families go through that are not always our focus. So can you talk a little bit about that piece?
Yeah. So I wrote that as a follow-up to a previous piece called The Quiet Place, which was about my experience having been a co-patient or co-survivor of my husband's 2 cancer occurrences, but most recently, and that piece was mostly about his sudden cardiac arrest. Which I responded to, and I called 911 and did 10 minutes of CPR. And then he did survive, physically and neurologically intact. So it was a great outcome. But even when it's a great outcome, that was a traumatic experience to go through. So that piece kind of just described what happened and what my reaction was. And Words to Leave By was a follow-up to say what helped. So the experience was, I called it The Quiet Place because after the crisis mode was over and he was home, and he had, survived, there's a difference between, surviving the event and survivorship, living your life having survived the event. So when we transitioned into that part, the survivorship part, and the recovery, then it was like my brain just sort of shut down. And I actually did a graduate program in cognitive neuroscience. And so I was experiencing it, and it was a difficult experience, but there was also a piece of me that was like, well, this is interesting. I wonder what's happening. Because it was like, I just could not find words. I could talk about, anything related to him and his care and sort of the logistics of the day, but I couldn't really follow conversations with people. I just couldn't take in and retain what they were saying and then process and then come up with other words to say back. I was having a lot of one-word answers, and it was like, I lost my language. And one of these days I hope to kind of look into the neuroscience of that, because I have some hypotheses about what's going on there, and probably somebody has already studied all of this, and I'd love to incorporate that into my work. But so The Quiet Place was describing that. And then Words to Leave By talks about what got me out of that and how I got my language back, and specifically that it is language it's other language that helps you get the language back. And so I think, in those moments of trauma, you're trying to process what happened and trying to understand what happened. And of course, the way that we humans think is largely in words. But I did not have words for what had happened. So it was hard to process. I just kept having flashbacks or, emotion thing, but not words. And so I finally, it took about 6-8 months or something, but over the course of that time, I found 3 pieces of writing that really did the job for me of helping me come out of that place of trauma and be able to process what had happened and talk about what had happened and move on and, begin healing. So it details those pieces and why each one of them helped.
It's great.
Kristin, thanks so much for walking us through this. And for those of you who are listening, it's also really important to note that Kristin was the recipient of the AHA Award this year in Resuscitation Science Symposium for all of the incredible work she's done in advocacy in this space. So coming back to this particular piece that I love so much, I'm on the wards right now for the heart failure or the heart function service rather. And I think it's so important to guide our trainees in terms of how they communicate with patients and their loved ones, the co-patients, their patient partners. And one thing you did in this piece that I thought was so brilliant is you kind of categorized the words that stayed with you. And you called them, and we can refer our listeners to this central figure, if you will, words that explained, words that named, and then words that validated your feelings. And so, and you go on to kind of really give examples of each of those. And I think of myself on the wards right now, and that's some of the things that I'm bringing to the trainees that I'm working with, which is, did you explain what happened? Did you name what happened? And then did you validate what happened? And can you just, first of all, just talk to us a little bit about how you came up with these buckets that make so much inherent sense? And then what about each one of them stayed with you, and why do you think they're so important for us to incorporate as clinicians?
Yeah, so each of the buckets represents one of the 3 pieces of writing that I found that helped. And I tried to think about, why did each one of these help? What exactly was it? Which part of it helped, or which part of my experience rather was helped by each one? And tried to find a framework to share that in an easy to remember way so that it could be kind of a practical guide. A lot of the writing and advocacy that I've done around this has been more of just awareness based. And I wanted to kind of take that next step into, okay, so now that people are aware, what can they do about it? How can they make it better? So the explain piece or category was built or inspired by Paul Snoblin's lay responder guide. So Paul Snoblin is a paramedic in the Peel region of Canada, and he had experience, responding to cardiac arrests, and it just struck him that all of the responders, and often that's family, but not always, all of the responders kind of had the same kinds of questions and things that they struggled with afterward about it, and think parts of that experience that were traumatic to them. And just through his experience, having those conversations with them, he put together this guide that's now publicly available as well, for people, for lay responders and bystanders of a cardiac arrest. And I would assume that it's helpful for other things that are similar as well. But it explains the first thing that you have to address in an experience like that is the sensory pieces, right? Like trauma takes you down to your survival instincts, right? And to your senses. I mean, you're not up in your prefrontal cortex at that moment. You're more like, in the limbic system and the brainstem and those areas. And so you need those things addressed first. And that's so opposite to how things often happen in the healthcare system, where the first thing, when I got to the hospital, what they were telling me was, statistics about survival rates and, giving me all the medical jargon. And I am not medically trained. I'm not a physician or a healthcare worker in any way. I am in marketing. It's not at all the same. So even though I'm an educated person, I'm not familiar with the language used within the healthcare system, very much. So that all required my prefrontal cortex that I did not have access to in those moments. And so it's funny, the physicians would come and they would give me these updates and they felt like they were being helpful. And I know they were trying to be helpful for sure. But that's just not what is helpful in those moments. What actually would have been nice is like human touch, right? Like a hug, which I didn't have because it was COVID and I could only be there by myself, and I was only allowed to stay for about an hour before even I got kicked out of the hospital. And so I do remember feeling like I wish that I had just a hug or even a weighted blanket, just like something. You feel like you're just sort of drifting out into the universe, and you need to feel that like something is containing you in your body still. So that's very sensory based. And then a lot of the flashbacks and the questions that you have are like, you just saw this person who, statistically speaking, is likely to be someone you love or live with. And you just saw them do all sorts of very bizarre, weird things that a human body doesn't normally do. And, in my husband's case, I heard his agonal breathing, which was actually quite loud and alarming sounding. And I saw him turn blue and then purple and then gray. And I felt him, his body responding to my compressions. And that is a weird thing to be doing. And I think for healthcare professionals, things can get so normalized because it's what you do day in and day out. And you've had all this training in it and you've had all these years to, process how you feel about all that stuff. But for just a general person in the public, we don't have any of that. And so all of that was really bizarre. Some in cardiac arrest, there are other things. They could have a seizure, there's other things that you might witness, and you really need the sensory pieces explained to you. What did you see? What did you hear? Why were they doing that? What did that mean about what was happening within their body? Why is your body now feeling the way that it is feeling? You have all this adrenaline and you're having these flashbacks, and like, why is all of that happening? And just to know, one, that that's normal, that's what you might expect to be happening after what you had to witness. And then two, why that's happening, which then helps you kind of be able to process it in your own brain, which helps you put it to bed eventually. So that was the explain piece of just what is it that happened? What is ventricular fibrillation? Why did that cause a cardiac arrest? What is the difference between a cardiac arrest and a heart attack? I didn't know. I have a master's degree from the Ivy League. I didn't know that. So I think, you can't assume, it's the curse of knowledge if you can't assume that everyone that comes through the doors knows what you know as a physician. And so it's really important to back up to the beginning and explain all of those very basic pieces and really stay focused on the sensory bits of it in particular. And then the name category was based on a paper by Katie Dainty and Kirsty Haywood that's called The Forgotten Patient. And that's the first time I had encountered this idea of a co-patient or a co-survivor. And I remember reading that and just thinking, yes, that is what it is. Because it felt hard to explain to people why it was that I was having such a difficult time about the cardiac arrest after he had survived. And it was clear that it was going to be okay, even physicians, you hear that a lot of, well, he survived. So, it's a good outcome. You should be happy now, go live your life. Yes, but also, it was trauma that happened to me. It didn't happen to my body. The physical trauma, well, CPR was kind of physically traumatic, but the cardiac arrest happened in his body, but he didn't experience it, mentally. He was unconscious, and then he was in a medically induced coma, and then, he woke up and it was just explained to him, but he has no memory. He has no, psychological experience of the event itself. Of course, he has his own experience and trauma associated with having had one of those, but the event itself was not his lived experience, but it was my lived experience responding to that, finding my husband dying in our bed in the middle of the night when everything was just fine when we went to bed, and responding to that and seeing what I saw and hearing what I heard, his body slamming on the floor when they shocked him and all of the things, right? That was my lived experience. And so that's why that idea of a co-patient and a co-survivor really rang true for me. And it gave me a word to be able to explain to people why this hurts so much and why I need help right now and what kind of help I need. So, having been with him through 2 instances of cancer and a cardiac arrest, I think it's very helpful to name both what the thing is, what happened, right? What the diagnosis is, because naming something, labeling something is essentially a diagnosis. And once you have a diagnosis, think of all the things you can do that you can't do before you have that diagnosis. Think of all the questions that get resolved just by coming to that conclusion of that diagnosis. It's the same for naming things and labeling experiences. So, naming that he had a cardiac arrest, that gave me information about what had happened. Naming that I was a co-survivor gave me information about what had happened and what is still happening, and how to talk to others about it. And it's just so much more difficult to do that before you have some name to give it. So it's very powerful to be able to have those names. Then the last category was validate, and that was based on Rana Addish's book, In Shock. I'm sure everyone is familiar with that by now, but just in case you're not, she's a physician, a critical care pulmonologist, I believe, and she's also a critical care patient. And she wrote a book about her experience as a patient, but being able to view her own experience as a patient through the lens of a physician. And so she kind of talks about what it's like to be in both of those roles and what you learn in each one, and what you bring to the interaction from each side. And so how her experience as a patient helps her be, a better physician, and maybe illuminated for her areas of the healthcare system that are problematic that you don't notice until you're looking at it from the patient and family side of it. And so that really helped. That was kind of that I think was the last one that I found. And it was the kind of linchpin that let me move on from my own experience, because it told me that I haven't talked as much about this side of it. Maybe that's my next piece. I don't know. But my experience at the hospital that he was taken to by ambulance was as traumatic for me as the cardiac arrest itself. It did not go well in very specific ways. And reading her book told me that I'm not alone in that is maybe a universal experience, unfortunately. I mean, the specifics are different case by case, but a lot of these gaps in the healthcare system are systemic. They're everywhere within the system. And it told me that somebody else sees them too, right? Like, I'm not crazy. I'm not overreacting. These are real things, and someone else had an experience with them as well and came to similar conclusions that I did, and had similar emotional reactions to them that I did, and that just helped feel like, okay, so this is I don't know, I don't want to use the word normal because it shouldn't be normal, but that it's something that other people are experiencing too, and so I'm not alone, and I'm not imagining it.
And Kristin, you highlight this so well, and it's so important in our care of our patients is to think about the family. I hope it will make you feel a little happy, a little, that, we actually wrote a statement. I was the co-chair of a statement for the American Heart Association, and it was titled Engaging Families in Adult Cardiovascular Care. But at least we're talking about it, is what I will say, because what we found when we wrote that is just glaring gaps. Basically, everywhere that we were writing about, how do we engage families? What do we know? Basically, we said we have no data. We have very limited data, or we had no data. And that we wrote it as basically a call to action, really, to understand, because it couldn't be a guideline because there was really limited to no evidence, right? But I think that by your voice being amplified and the way that you beautifully communicate, I think this is going to help all of us. We, of course, we're focused on the patient, and there's things that have to be done, but
absolutely, yes,
absolutely right. You're absolutely right, though, that there's this family outside waiting, and also going through the many things that we sometimes don't even talk about. And during COVID, I think you pointed out what had happened to so many people, that they were not only not talked to necessarily, but they weren't even allowed to be near their loved ones. And so they actually didn't even enter the conversation where someone's like, is the spouse okay? Is that that person who's going to take care of this person? We had no idea during the pandemic, when we were discharging people, where were they going? We sometimes had never met the family. We might have talked to them. Maybe we FaceTimed them if we were lucky. Not always. Sometimes it was the nurses and not the physicians connecting with the family. So we have a lot more work to do. And I think for me, your piece just at least gave us something that, like, almost a template that we all need to work on.
Yeah, and it is and is going to continue to be a huge issue. Think of all the people, and I was one of them, that during COVID were not allowed to be with their loved ones during a critical time where you were not sure if they were going to live or die. And many of them did die, and you never got to say goodbye. And you never, it's a mass trauma right now in the whole world. So this issue is not going away. His cardiac arrest happened May of 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic, in America at least. And so there are so many others out there that have an experience very similar to mine, whether it was COVID or a cardiac arrest or something else, where we were not allowed, we were denied a basic human need. And for understandable reasons, but it happened. Even if that was the best course of action for mitigating disease, it did cause an enormous amount of psychological harm for people. And we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to face that. It won't do any good to just ignore that piece just because those people weren't the, patients with the capital P. They weren't the ones in the hospital beds. They are still, co-patients. They are still the people that were affected by the same very disease that brought the patient in.
And I think, Kristin, you are bringing up, or you're touching upon something that's beyond just this specific incident, right? Which is what you're trying to allude to, is that we are a part of a collective psyche. We're all responsible for our collective psyche. And I think the more we keep that in mind, the better we will all be for it. And I think, one of the reasons that this, our relationship has been so synergistic is because we also feel such an intense need to change the words we use in communicating with patients and their families. And you've seen this, and you've helped us actually. We've talked about how heart failure is not what we want to talk about. We want to talk about heart function and just the inherent damage that word can do when you meet a person. I'm on the floors now. I'm seeing it, 10 times a day. I think all the words that we use have tremendous power. And so when we recognize the power that we have, and then also take it a step further, as you've shown us, in ensuring that we're using the right words, but then we're also achieving what needs to be addressed for patients and for those families. And that's why I love those buckets so much. So you need to have words that explain, you need to be careful about those words. You have to then say, okay, I've explained this now, but these are the medical terms. These are what they're called. And then, listen, you're not alone. This is how often this happens. We're here for you. You're here with us,
Right.
And recognizing that oneness that is inherent to all of us as human beings, and recognizing our space in the collective psyche.
And just feeling seen and understood by the physicians that are treating, your loved one. I think right now there's this wall between, there's the patient-physician relationship. I think there needs to be a, family-physician relationship as well. And right now there's more of a wall right there where, you only communicate about the medical pieces, you're communicating about a case, as you might with your colleagues. That's not at all how the family member is approaching that interaction, though. So, people are not cases. People are humans, and they are tied very closely to other humans, and we all affect each other, especially when it's, your own network and the people that you love. So, when one is affected, many are affected. And it's important to, at the very least, just keep that in mind in your interactions, and maybe take off the, medical training hat for just a second, or at least scoot it over and make room for, also wear your human being hat, and you're having an interaction human to human. And how would you want someone to be interacting with you in this way? Or how would you want someone to be interacting with your spouse or child or parent or family member, and behave in those ways instead of, the cold, detached ways that I think sometimes training encourages.
Kristin, I just wanted to say that you always give us so much to think about, and so much you always teach me when we talk, even when I think I am more interested than maybe some about how our patients react to things, and then I continue to learn from you. So I just like to thank you for your wisdom and for sharing your experience, because we know when you go through something traumatic like this, it's not always that easy, because we're asking you to relive it as well every time that we talk about it. But I hope that your words will just help us as a community get better at what we do. And that means engaging the co-patient, the entire family for that matter, so that we can really, when we're sending our patients home, that we're sending the whole family home being able to cope with what's next.
Yeah. And thank you so much for being willing to listen, and for bringing me on and having me highlight that perspective for people. I think it goes both ways too. I think a lot of people become healthcare workers because they care about other people and they want to help other people. And I think there's a lot about our system that tries to suck the humanity out. So just trying to put some of that back in for the patients and the co-patients, but also for the providers as well, because you guys are human too. So having to respond to other people in these really difficult situations in ways that maybe don't honor our shared humanity, I think is difficult on both sides.
Amen. So we're so looking forward to your third piece whenever you're ready. And thanks again for spending some time with us and educating us as always.
Thank you.